Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for February 12th through 18th. This week I read 2 books, I watched 3 shows, and I listened to 1 book. A couple of things I just wanted to get out of the way before we talk about my entertainment for the week. Yes, my hair is a different color now. It is now midnight blue, which means that my hands are also slightly midnight blue. And you don't want to see my bathroom. You also don't want to see my back right now because I can't reach it to get the hair dye off it, so that's fun. It's also a little bit shorter. It feels lovely. Thank you very much to my best friend Taryn, who always does all of my hair. She also did my eyebrows. She's lovely, and it was great to see her again because we don't get to see each other enough. The second thing I quickly wanted to mention, because I'm really proud of it, but I don't know how to shoehorn it in here organically, so I'm just going to say it. This week I actually took time off of the really big cross stitch I'm working on to do a much smaller cross stitch, and I just wanted to show it to you because it's very relevant and I think it's pretty great. I made it in like a day and a little bit, and I think it's pretty cool. I posted it on my Instagram. If you cross stitch, there is a link in that post to where you can buy the pattern for yourself. The first book I finished this week is Becoming Shameless. This is a very short memoir that I actually read the entirety of while I was in my bathtub on Wednesday for my usual book bath. Eden grew up in an abusive home situation, which she didn't really come to realize was abusive until she got out of it and could kind of get some perspective on it, which often happens with people. Because Eden and I are similar in age, although I believe she's maybe 3 years younger than me if I've done some math correctly, a lot of this was really relatable down to the times that she was growing up in, but also the fact that she used to be a theater kid when she was growing up. And then of course that sense of just wanting to be your best and having that never be enough. While I was reading this, I was actually thinking back on I'm Glad My Mom Died, and this is actually a comp title for it. It's actually mentioned at the end of the book that she wrote this book after reading that one. This one was also relatable because she made some realizations about herself a little bit later in life than people usually do. And I say that with full sarcasm because you can make realizations about yourself whenever in life. But again, I think I was a little bit older by the time I figured things out. This memoir is fantastic and does come with a whole host of trigger warnings, which I did post on my Goodreads review, so check there or any of the resources down below for trigger warnings if you require those. The other book I read this week was also a memoir, and that was British Columbiana, a millennial in a gold rush town. This one was about a young woman who's just finishing up, I believe, her master's and decides that she is going to take a 6-month position in the town of Barkerville, which is in northern British Columbia, just a little bit of ways from Wells. Barkerville is a place I've actually been to before. I went on a road trip. I didn't actually visit the attraction, but we kind of were in the parking lot. It was a good place to stop and stretch our legs, and I was like, this place kind of seems interesting. But at the time I never really thought to myself about how people would have to live pretty close to here, how many interpreters they have, all of those types of things. So I was interested to know about that because I do have a history of being a tour guide. I also have a history of living in a place where I work that's pretty remote. I used to work at a place called Horn Lake Caves, which I believe is about 12 kilometers away from paved roads. And during my on days I actually camped on site, and on my weekends I came home. However, the people that work at this site either have their own homes in Wells or they have staff accommodation, and that's one of the many aspects that is explored through this memoir. The author of our memoir definitely has anxiety and is going to therapy for it, so it was good to see that represented in this book. However, I spent a lot of time reading this book and wondering if the people that are featured in it are ever going to read it and how they're going to feel about that, because it doesn't look like she's changed any names. She's very open about how she feels about certain people, not in like a mean way, but in a, hey, I had romantic feelings for this person but it didn't work out and it sucks that it didn't work out and I'm never gonna find somebody, and those kinds of anxieties. So even though it's unlikely that I'll ever know if any of these people have read this book, it's interesting to think about what they might think about it, if that makes any sense. On to what I watched this week. I watched the 7th episode of the 15th season of RuPaul's Drag Race, which is not the episode from this week but the week previous. I am a week behind, and I was going to catch up last night and watch this week's episode, but I had a realization this week of I'm not going to be able to finish watching the series because the platform I watch it on is only available in Canada. So when I'm in Europe 2 weeks from now, I'm not going to be able to continue watching the series. So either I'm just going to take a pause on it for now, or I'm just going to watch Bussy Queen's wrap-ups just to figure out what happened with the season. If memory serves, this was the acting challenge of Daytona Wind 2, but they used a different editing style on this reboot than they did with Daytona Winds, the first one, which was adding in a lot of fart sound effects. This one was a style I wasn't really familiar with, and it seemed like they cut a lot of the lines that were in there, so the rigory of the whole reality show is really apparent. For example, we see people rehearsing certain lines and then they don't end up in the final product, and that's something that at least one of the queens has spoken out about this episode, where they thought that they had like this huge big role and then they only had a couple of lines in the final product. So they were talking about how they thought they did really well and they thought they were going to be in the top, and then they watched it and they're like, I was barely in that, what happened? And again, there's still so many queens that I just can't remember every single one. I just enjoy watching it when I do. This week Chad and I also finished the 8th and final season of House. We have now watched every single episode together, which I think is kind of cool. If you've never seen the ending of this show, I'm not going to ruin it for you, although I did not see certain things coming, and then I did hope to see certain things coming in the final episode, because otherwise, I think I just would have been angry. Also, when we were watching what is actually the final episode, we were told that this is episode 22 and there is an episode 23, so I got really confused when it seemed very, very final and I didn't know how they were going to do another episode on top of that. And when we rolled into episode 23, it was actually more of a making of type of thing. And what was really fun about that is the premise of it was Hugh Laurie is wandering around with a camera and going to different departments and seeing different people and interviewing different people, but he was doing it in his natural voice, and if you are not aware, he is a British man. So there'd be a lot of voiceover of him talking over certain things, and Chad kept forgetting who was talking until he saw him on screen again, and was just like, oh god, I hate that, because he is so used to seeing House as an American man and not a British actor. I, however, when I was a kid, saw Hugh Laurie for the first time in Blackadder, and I did not recognize him when I first started watching House as a teenager. I was actually visiting with a British friend and we were talking about House, and I was like, yeah, I can't figure out why he seems familiar though, because it was back in the days where I didn't have a smartphone in my pocket and I wasn't able to just IMDb every single thing every time somebody looked familiar to me. And he was like, well, he was in Blackadder, and I was like, are you what? No. And of course, as soon as his friend said it, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, he obviously looks different. He obviously looks older because there's lots of time between those two different things. But yeah, the American accent definitely threw me off. Also, the fact that his voice is much lower than it is in Blackadder. In any case, that sure was a way to finish this show. If you've seen it and want to talk to me about it, let me know down below. Maybe just put spoilers, skip a couple of lines, and put all your comments for anybody who hasn't seen it. Although it did end over a decade ago, so do what you want. My roommates and I also watched the entirety of the 6th and final season of The Expanse. This is based on a very long 9-book series, and I read the first book once upon a time, a long time ago. This is one of the very few things where my roommate has read more of it than I have. I think she's read 6 or 7 of the books. And this is a show where she and Chad and I actually watched the first 3 or 4 seasons pretty much back to back to back to back in 2020, and then we eventually watched the 5th season, and now we've eventually watched the 6th season. There is so much that goes on in this show that I'm just like, I've completely forgotten about that. When we were watching seasons back to back to back to back, it was much easier to keep track of who was who and little references to this, that, and the other thing, but watching this season without really remembering much of what happened in the rest of the show, I was just kind of like, political things happening because political things are happening. Neat. Also, I might have been falling asleep because something in the last episode seemed really, really abrupt to me, and I don't know if that was the show or if I had just like passed out for 30 seconds or something like that, but just all of a sudden that happened and I was like, but wait, what? Like, if you're not gonna make another season because I think you're cancelled, this makes sense to do it that quickly, but it was also super abrupt, so I don't know if that was a problem with my own consciousness or if it was just really, really abrupt and could have been shot better. On to the book I listened to this week, and that was The Bodyguard. The premise of this book is this woman is a personal protection agent. That's her job. That's what she's been doing for ages. She's really, really good at it, especially because she's a little bit taller than me, but not by much, so she doesn't look super imposing. And when people think of the stereotype of bodyguard, they don't usually think tiny petite woman. They think like big, tall, muscular man. However, a lot of your job when you're a bodyguard is just wandering around assessing threats and making sure it never actually gets to a physical altercation. When we meet our main character, it's actually the day after her mother's funeral, so she is not doing so great, and she would actually love to get back to work because she loves to bury herself in her work. However, her mom's dying wish was for her to take a vacation, so she decides that she's going to basically just go on a site, pick a random place, and book some tickets, and then she's going to have to go get her boyfriend to actually agree to go on this trip with her because she doesn't want to go by herself. However, when she decides to go into work, even though her boss told her not to come into work for at least 5 days, her boss is kind of mad that she's there, but she's there specifically to talk to her boyfriend so they can go on a trip together because he also works at the same place. And she overhears her boss and her boyfriend talking about something that's going to make her angry, so of course she busts in and wants to know what it's about. There is a lot to do with that situation and things that happen because of that situation. I'm just going to skip over what that is because I'd like for you to see that for yourself. And I'm going to just let you know that eventually when she does get another assignment, it's actually to be the personal protection officer for a huge movie star. He actually hasn't worked for a while, but that's because he doesn't want to work, but he's in town because this is where he's actually from, and his mother is about to undergo some cancer treatment, so he wants to be here for that. However, there's some estrangement with certain family members because of some family things that happened previously, so that becomes a complex dynamic, and the whole reason that he needs protection while he's there is because, one, the studio he works for says he has to have it, and he does sort of have a stalker in town, and when she finds out that he's back in town, things could escalate. This is a romance that has a lot of the classic romance tropes, some of which you might enjoy, some of which you might not, but I think they were all played really well. For example, we have forced proximity, we have fake relationship, we have the one bed trope, although she definitely sleeps on the floor. There's also things to do with previous relationships and not knowing people's feelings, and this was all in all a really wonderful time. I listened to this over 2 days while I was cross-stitching, and I just absolutely adored it. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!